Well, good morning. Good morning to see you all. Thanks for being here as we get into the summer, enjoying the season and all the activities. I think we've already given away the plot by handing out the building blocks grid that you should have received as you walked in. So the question I have for you for today is, how often do you act like Mr. Wilson when it comes to your neighbors? That you actually are avoiding knowing them, being in a relationship with them, tolerating them. Or maybe it's just passiveness. Maybe it's that you just take for granted that you actually have neighbors who are living real lives next to you and the busyness of life takes over. Or maybe you've just never thought like that should be something that you should consider and take seriously, is to get to know your neighbors and be in relationship with them. Jay, the founding pastor of Mile High Vineyard, who we planted our church out of, wrote a book with his friend and co-author Dave Runyon. And it stemmed from a conversation in which they were sitting with the mayor of Arvada, and they were asking, what is it that churches can do to actually be an effective light in their community? What would change? What could shift that churches could take on? And the mayor said, if people could just serve each other that they live next door to, everything would change. Like the way the city tries to manage the issues within our city that are always coming towards us in the mayor's office, like when an elderly person can't shovel their sidewalks in the wintertime, and then they're getting a citation. If a neighbor would just take the initiative to help them out, that would shift everything for our city. So Dave and Jay walked out, looking at each other going, so a mayor who's not a Christian just asked us if we would just live the gospel that Jesus told us to love our neighbors. So Jay and Dave proceed to write this book as they begin to, push this and teach this. And they actually went to a pastor's gathering and they pulled out their little building blocks grid, which you all have. Looks like this. And they gave it to this room full of church leaders and just asked them, can you name your 8 closest neighbors? And in that room, none of the pastors could name more than 3 of 8. I remember coming to Arvada Vineyard to attend and Jay presenting this, and it was horrible to have the realization I don't know my neighbors. And he gave the challenge, he holds up the grid, and I walked up to him after, I said, so here's the thing I realized is I have to cross out the 3 on top because I have a field across the street from my house. And he goes, whoa, wait, that's not how this works. Like you don't get an out. You just have to readjust proximity. You wrap around the corners. You don't get the out just because there's a field on the other side of your street. So for all of you right now who are negotiating with me and having a mental argument of your excuses, I get it. So the question is, how many names do you know? Just sit here with this and just ask yourself. And what is it that's kept you from getting to know your neighbors? For most of us, I think in some ways, the most natural answer is just simply busyness. I stand up here today preaching and teaching and sharing this concept with you, feeling super convicted because over the last few months, I've had to admit I don't know my neighbors directly next door to us. And they've lived there for over a year. And that house is a rental property, So I don't know if in my mind I'm making the excuse like, well, they're going to come and go, so what's the point? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to fix this because I'm preaching on it. So I think I'm going to ask my kids if we can bake some cookies and walk over and just go, hey, we've waved at each other. Anybody ever just do the neighborly wave? Like, hey, coming and going down the street and you're just two-fingered, like, hey, I acknowledge you. But in some ways, it's a passive avoidance to actually like knowing our neighbors. What's interesting is C.S. Lewis writes in the book, The Screwtape Letters, where the senior demon is teaching and admonishing Screwtape, and he writes a strategy memo to his apprentice that says this: do what you will, there's going to be some benevolence as well as some malice in your patient's soul. The great thing is to direct the malice to his immediate neighbors, whom he meets every day, and to thrust his benevolence out to the remote circumference, to people he does not know. The malice thus becomes wholly real, and the benevolence largely imaginary. C.S. Lewis wrote that in 1942, and it's real in our neighborhoods in 2025. Well, now 26. Goodness, I wrote my note to myself, like, lost a year. But think about that. Like, how many people do you hear in our culture who's be a good person, we need to love, and it's this generalized love that's ethereal and floats around, and we talk about justice, but we never actually do justice. We don't do love. We talk about that our values are to be people of power and of love and of a sound mind. Do we actually truly live out love to those in closest proximity to us? One of the ironic things is that it seems like the automatic garage door did this to us. The fact that you can drive to your house, drive in your garage, close the garage door before you ever actually even get out of the car. And so we have to learn to reprogram our lives and the way we live them with our neighbors in order to actually get to know our neighbors. I want to take us through the scriptures. As I was preparing for this, we've taught so many times in our church on this. For many of you, you're like, yep, we know this sermon, here we go. But it's a chance for us to re-up and reconsider what are we doing with our schedules and how do we love neighbors well. That I thought, I want to look. So I flipped to the back and just looked at the list of all the scriptures that talk about neighbors. And I think we naturally might go, if you're somewhat familiar with scriptures, that we think it starts with Jesus, but it really goes all the way back to the forming of the Israelite people as a people of God in the Exodus. The original line is found in Leviticus. And it says this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. God is describing himself and saying, because I am your God, then you are to love your neighbor. A 3,000-year-old commandment that keeps showing up through scripture because I think we need to keep hearing it and being reminded of it. What's interesting about this context is Leviticus is not just philosophical or ethereal, it's practical laws reflecting the covenant that God made with us. And so we behave in such a way because of God's love for us. Things like don't steal from your coworkers. Don't lie to each other. Don't trip a blind man. Oh, that joke went over really well there, you guys. But loving your neighbor is an actual thing you do. It's a literal thing you do with actual people. It was never meant to just be abstract, that we just love our neighbor as if it were everybody. It actually shows up in Proverbs. It says this: do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to do so. Do not say to your neighbor, go and come again, tomorrow I will give it, when you have it with you. Do not plan evil against your neighbor who dwells trustingly beside you. Notice those words, dwells trustingly beside you. Your neighbor assumes basic safety because of proximity to you. They assume you're not a threat. And then it also talks about how we express love in caring for them and not withholding that which we can do to bless our neighbor. So the question isn't just don't be a threat, which I would say most of us are like, yeah, we're not going to threaten our neighbor. But it's like, do we actually reflect the heart of God by doing good and blessing them with our actions? Check out the scene that we were just watching from the movie as we continue to see how Dennis is going to love his neighbor well. Hey, I would argue that Dennis the Menace is actually modeling love for a neighbor. He's really caring for Mr. Wilson. He's really concerned. And the funny part is Mr. Wilson keeps enduring the mess of his little neighbor. And I would just ask, are you willing to let yourself be interrupted by the messiness of your own neighbors? When we look at Scripture, we move to the New Testament, we see that each of the Gospels gives an account where Jesus is talking to the teachers of the law about the greatest commandment. And this is what it says in Matthew chapter 22. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So he first names what's known as the Shema from Deuteronomy 6, which is that you're loving God with your everything, with everything about you embodied to love God. But then he adds the Leviticus reference and saying that it's a second like it, that it's that significant, that he volunteers the neighbor command as a reflection of your love for God. In Mark 12, we see this account. It says, and one of the scribes came up and heard them disputing with one another. And seeing that he had answered them well, asked him, which commandment is the most important of all? Jesus answered, the most important is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. And the scribe said to him, you are right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one and there is no other besides him. And to love him with all the heart and with all the understanding and with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself is much more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. And when Jesus saw that he had answered wisely, he said to him, you are not far from the kingdom of God. And after that, no one dared ask him any more questions. Whether this is a completely different account or a different version of telling the same account, the continued on reflection, Jesus is naming, when he names that thing, let's not miss it. He says, you are not far from the kingdom of God. To live in the kingdom of God is that you bring the peace and the shalom of the kingdom with you wherever you go, and you live in such a way that you experience it and then you give it away so others bump into the kingdom of God. That it's an opportunity for gospel witness. In those days, we see that the sacrifices, the rituals had become the main thing. It had become about behavior and checking boxes. And Jesus is pushing back, reminding them the intent has always been to live in love. Not just follow the rules, but you're doing the rules because it's an expression of God's love for you and that you give it to others. And then we go on. Maybe one of the things you've heard the most, if you're familiar with this teaching or you're familiar with the Gospels, the story of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10. And behold, a lawyer stood up and put him to the test, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" This is the very classical rabbinical nature. If you understand, they never answer directly. They answer questions to answer. And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." Notice here. But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" If we're honest, I think we do this. We have the bumper stickers on our cars that say, "Be a good person." To who? I mean, it's helpful if you do that while driving. That is helpful. But we make it this ethereal thing. Again, as C.S. Lewis said. We just make it so innocuous and so general that we don't actually literally love our neighbor. Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan," the enemy to the listeners, "as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, 'Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back.' Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers?" He said, "The one who showed mercy." And Jesus said to him, "You go and do likewise." So we ask this question as a deflection, as a way to almost maybe get out of well, what does that even mean? And Jesus doesn't define it for him. He tells a story. And the lawyer has to admit that the enemy to the Jewish people, that the people that they condemned, that man showed love and truly reflected the heart of Jesus. You see, neighboring isn't just a status you confer, but it's a practice that you choose and you continually have to re-up. What's convicting to me is that the priest and the Levite are religious professionals, and they both pass by. And they probably had good excuses. We've seen this story, I've seen it taught, maybe they're just in a hurry, or they're just practicing good boundaries. And the one who nobody expects is the one who stops gets his hands dirty, gets interrupted, pays out of his own pocket, reflecting generosity. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. As we move on in the New Testament, we see that the apostles talk about it. Paul writes to the Romans in chapter 13, owe no one anything except to love each other, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. So, sometimes we have to stop trying to just be a good person and actually live into love. Not just a general love, but a love that's tangible. And when we do that, it's like you stop worrying about the sin management of your life because you're living out the expression of love that God has for you. In Galatians, he writes, for you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For as the whole law is fulfilled in one word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another. This seems to continually matter in the early church, that they're embodying and embracing the living into of truly loving their neighbors. And if we observe the early church, the whole world was changed one neighbor at a time. James writes this to the early church. If you really fulfill the royal law according to the scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You are doing well. But if you show partiality, you're committing sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. It's interesting, he labels that the royal law, the law of the king, that it's not optional. And frankly, it's not advanced Christianity. This is the simplest, tangible thing we can do to show love as followers of Jesus. And then I want to revisit, because I don't know if you noticed, I said all the Gospels talk about it, but I skipped over John. But I want to land with the Message version. And it says this, in John 1:14, the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. We saw the glory with our own eyes, the one-of-kind glory, like Father, like Son, generous inside and out, true from start to finish. What we may not realize is that we are simply following the model that God has given us in what he did himself in sending Jesus to incarnate himself in flesh and literally living amongst us, living on mission to set us free. In the same way, whether you realize it or not, God has placed you right where you're at for such a time as this to reflect the heart of Christ to a watching world. And it's not always easy. It can get messy. I've talked to plenty of pastors who we've adopted this over the last 10 years, and a few of us are joking that we want to collaborate on a book called When Art of Neighboring Goes Bad. Because there's plenty of hard things. When you do real relationships with people who live next door to you and live close to you, you're just going to have conflict. It just is. Things are going to go wrong. And we still get to show up and reflect the heart of Jesus, and I think that speaks volumes in and of itself. So what does this actually look like? So let me walk you through this. Everybody hold your piece of paper. This is your homework to take home with you. You should have one of these. If you didn't get one, raise your hand. I'll have somebody hand one to you. But first is to know their name. So even right now, I'm gonna spell it out. Let's see how far you can get. First, you know the name of the neighbor. And don't say the guy with the big truck. That doesn't count. The guy with The neighbor with the dog that barks too much, his actual name, her actual name. So that's where you start, that you actually know their name. And then second, you know something about them. What do they do for work? Who are their kids? Where do their kids go to school? What hobbies are they interested in? Just something about them. And then the third thing, if you list it out, the third thing is that you know their story, that you can name what is it that formed them? What is their worldview? What do they believe about our culture? What are their priorities or values? What was their upbringing? So this week, my invitation to you is, can you learn one name of a neighbor you don't know? And how might you do that? What would it look like to just adjust some of your patterns of behaviors, that you don't just drive into the garage and close it behind you, but that you linger, that you pay attention when others are out? Maybe you spend more time on the front porch than the back patio. You don't have to throw a block party, but you can. That's how I do it. It's just a bulk way of just get it done all at once. Just throw the block party, kind of write it all down. You don't have to get into deep spiritual conversations. That can come later if it ever does. The invitation is, we're simply incarnating the love of God to those closest to us. For the introverts in the room, you don't have to become an extrovert. You just stay intentional. What would it be that changes and adjusts in your daily patterns that will open up the doors of opportunity for you to connect? As I mentioned earlier, sometimes the easiest thing could be bake some cookies, come up with something that gives you an excuse to go knock on the door. And some of you are like, that sounds like death. That's okay. Here's the secret I want to tell you. You're not going to die. And when they open the door, you just say, hi, I've lived across the street from you for 5 years and never bothered to introduce myself, but I want to change that today. Here's some cookies. My name is, fill in the blank. What's your name? And what's surprising is you might actually get through a couple of those first key things in a 2-minute interaction. What Jay and Dave advocate for and wrote about in the book is that this is the thing that the church can be known for, that can transform communities and neighborhoods. The reflection on that the early church made an impact by simply loving those in proximity to them. That they were a reflection of the heart of Jesus in such a way that made rippling impacts that eventually toppled an empire. It's not a campaign. It's not a program. It's simply knowing those you live amongst. C.S. Lewis states this: when they have really learned to love their neighbors as themselves, they will be allowed to love themselves as their neighbors. Writing about Christianity. That we learn about the love of God as we put it into action with each other. In the movie Dennis the Menace, if you guys recall, for those of you who are under the age of 30, this movie came out before you were born. And it was pointed out to me, they were asked, are you going to use a bunch of movies that are 30 years old? Yeah. Okay, then I will, because I feel validated and seen that you realize you get old and that you're just living on the movies of your childhood, and then it's like, oh no. I think Dennis the Menace is older than when I was a kid and It's a Wonderful Life came out. Isn't that horrible to think about? But this movie tells an arc, and we think it's the story of just this bratty kid, but there's a neighboring arc in it, and that we watch because Dennis keeps showing up, that something changes and shifts, and he gets, if you remember, Switchblade Sam kidnaps him. That does not go well for the bad guy. And when Mr. Wilson finds out, he gets really heartbroken and worried for little Dennis, and goes out and spends the night searching and calling for Dennis, trying to find him. And finally exhausted, comes and falls asleep on his front porch. And let's see how this ends. Things you can overlook. It comes full circle when you learn to love your neighbor. It can transform your own heart. Will you stand with me?